Okay, yes, fantastic, Kira. If you want to start at the end and we'll go from there, if that sounds good.
Great, thank you so much. I think I've also dropped off for a second. Colleagues, I have to apologize. I'm calling in from Beirut, where we have some power cuts from time to time. But I hope you're able to hear me loud and clear. If not, Yilva, please let me know and I'll try connecting on a different device. But colleagues, thank you so much for joining today. As Yilva said, we'll go through the PowerPoint in reversed order. So Yilva, if you could move to the next slide. The overview will show you how we've structured today's presentation. If you can go, yes, perfect. So Shaza will be back soon to discuss with you the background of the Gender Promotion Initiative, as well as some of the eligibility criteria. So what I will do is jump straight into the thematic focus areas for this year. So Yilva, we can go to slide 6. So as you are seeing, this year's GPI call for proposal focuses on women's engagement in climate change mitigation and adaptation and natural resource management. And it's responding directly.
Now we can't hear you, Kira.
I will turn off my video so that we don't get too much interruptions. So just to go back to this.
Well.
Perfect. So I was just explaining that the call for proposal is directly responding to last year's SG report on WPS and the thematic review of the PBSO on climate security and peace building of this year. And the nexus of climate peace and security has become increasingly prominent on the global agenda and in peace building. In fragile, more low-income countries, the impact of climate change can act as a risk multiplier, compounding existing vulnerabilities and drivers of conflict, as well as exacerbating violence, other personal or national vulnerabilities and threats. And a gender lens is truly important for understanding these peace and security implications of climate change, as the gender norms and power structure.
Kira, I believe we missed you. You dropped out for a second here.
Should I? Okay, perfect. I'm so sorry about this. It seemed to be working earlier. Okay, thanks everyone for your flexibility. So I was going to mention that next that women and girls face intersecting forms of inequality, as we know, due to age, race, ethnicity, class, sexual and gender identity, but also disability or refugee and IDP statuses. And in this way, they are obviously disproportionately impacted by climate change and its impacts on peace and security dynamics. And that's not only because they are exposed to unique risks due to their socioeconomic roles, but also because of these structural barriers to gender equality, which limits their adaptation and coping strategies. So for instance, in northern Nigeria, we've seen how climate change is exacerbating conflict between young male pastoralists and women in farming communities following the outmigration of other men. And this has resulted in an increased incidence of GBV on farmlands and water points. And there's an interesting report by UNEP, UNDP, DPPA, and UN Women on gender, climate, and security. It's called Sustaining Inclusive Peace on the Front Lines of Climate Change. And it discusses a case study that addresses exactly how women are overcoming like these norms of breadwinner masculinity in more feminized communities, despite experiencing structural barriers such as restricted access to capital or land. But beyond these risks, at the same time, climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts offer new opportunities, not only for women's participation and leadership, but also for conflict prevention and peace building. And in fact, climate action, we've seen, offers very unique entry points for strengthening women's leadership in peace building. So as we all know, in many parts of the world, women environmental defenders and peace builders are already playing a critical role in challenging unequal power relations, mobilizing for climate justice, and building more inclusive and sustainable peace. It's important to point out that there are still some critical gaps in terms of understanding how climate change impacts peace and security dynamics across different contexts. For instance, where climate change manifests in extreme weather events rather than droughts, or in situations where violence takes a different form, such as organized crime. And by addressing these gaps, we can design more effective and context-specific interventions to address climate-related security challenges. So that brings me to the first theme that I want to zoom in a little bit more on, which is climate change mitigation and adaptation. If we move to the next slide, please. I'll discuss a little bit first the climate change adaptation angle, which really is about making changes to the way we do things to manage or cope with impacts of climate change. This can involve changing how we use resources, developing new technologies, or even as simple as changing our daily habits. And the goal of climate change adaptation is truly to minimize the risks and harm and take advantage of new opportunities associated with climate change. So experience on the ground shows us that climate change adaptation can serve as a powerful tool for peace building if it's conducted in a conflict-sensitive, participatory, and inclusive manner. So carefully planned adaptation interventions can improve social cohesion, but also build trust in local institutions, economic stability, and contribute to building more resilient communities. So for instance, in the Gambia, the PBF supported a project that aimed to promote social cohesion and resilience by empowering communities to develop more effective coping mechanisms for managing climate risks, but also build sustainable livelihoods, reduce gender-related vulnerabilities. And the project focused, for instance, on providing training on advocacy pathways to address climate-related risks, with the goal of highlighting gender-specific concerns, needs, and priorities through different community platforms. But other climate adaptation interventions can include anything from climate-proofing agriculture, so adapting crops and agricultural practices to new climate realities, as to say. That could include relying on traditional and indigenous knowledge. It could also be an intervention around diversifying livelihoods to be less reliant on agriculture, for instance, using nature-based solutions or building infrastructure to improve the availability of natural resources. For instance, to protect communities from disasters, but it could also be around water management. Other examples that we've seen is introducing new technologies for adaptation around, for instance, irrigation systems using renewable energy. Or it could focus on restoring ecosystems around wetland protection or reforestation. And across these interventions, it's of course important to point out that women have the unique experience and knowledge of natural resources that are critical to designing and implementing effective adaptation strategies. And their recognition has grown for women, and especially young and indigenous women, as important actors and influencers in climate change policy. And in practice, women are often at the forefront already of adaptation efforts on the ground. But in order to really ensure that climate adaptation generates gains for women's leaderships, helps achieve conflict prevention and peace-building objectives, projects must really ensure that gender and power dynamics in relation to natural resources, but also climate change, are fully taken into account in the underlying conflict analysis, and that proposed interventions actively seek to overcome these obstacles that women's participation, and avoid reinforcing existing inequalities or vulnerabilities, while addressing these root causes of conflict and instability. On the other hand, we see the focus on mitigation, right? So that means taking actions to reduce or prevent the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. And in the context of a project, interventions could look like anything like improving access to local renewable sources of energy, investing in locally appropriate green technologies, protecting and conserving primary forest and other ecosystems. It could be about expanding green spaces or promoting sustainable consumption by implementing a sharing economy. And these efforts can also then contribute to peace and prevent conflicts by creating economic opportunities that are more sustainable, promoting more sustainable use of natural resources. And that's again provided that they are inclusive of all social groups and do tackle those barriers specifically experienced by women. So the next project I'm going to mention didn't have a special focus on gender equality and women's empowerment, but it's a great example of how we can mitigate climate change, and not many programs like this one exist. So it will be interesting to see how this year's GPI will help reduce carbon emissions through different interventions. So in Burundi, the PBF is
I believe we just lost you again. Burundi is the last thing we heard.
I think I cut out again. So
no worries,
I was mentioning the example of Burundi. The PBF here is supporting at the moment long-lasting conservation in the Kibera National Park. And it seeks to address some of the root causes of instability in the Great Lakes region. So the project focuses on supporting the government's efforts in deploying a new force of eco guards and implementing a reduced emissions
I think we lost Kira again for a second.
Sorry, it seems to be a little bit more repetitive now. I'll try to continue for as long as possible. But the project that I was describing really aims to reduce the drivers of deforestation in the park, while also accessing carbon markets to generate revenue from reduced emissions. So the project will also be providing alternative livelihood models that bring co-benefits to local communities, and it's really trying to tackle mitigation of climate change as well as foster peace and benefit like environmental concerns. And that's a really key issue. Now, I'll move to the second theme, which is really about natural resource management. So if we can go to the next slide. I should mention that this second theme overlaps obviously with the first one. So my advice is that if your proposal focuses on addressing the impacts of climate change on peace and security dynamics, we advise selecting the first theme. On the other hand, if your proposal addresses broader issues related to natural resource governance, access, distribution, we recommend selecting the second theme. Now, this specific theme is really about issues around access, ownership, and control of natural resources. And that includes anything related to the land, water, forests, minerals. And in a sense, the issues are a persistent source of grievances, contributing to conflict and violence in already climate vulnerable regions. And improving local natural resource management mechanisms and practices is in this way key to reducing conflict risks. So women's gendered roles as often primary natural resource managers in many societies means they're again uniquely placed to contribute to decision-making and conflict resolution efforts around these issues. I already mentioned that women often bring this unique set of insights and knowledge on natural resources in terms of use and how to manage it. So women's participation in the decision-making processes can help us to address power imbalances, promote more inclusive governance, which then contributes to more peaceful societies, while also enhancing their economic empowerment. If a targeted intervention looks at that, and reducing gender-based inequalities So projects on women's engagement in natural resource management, it can focus on strengthening local governance mechanisms, including by ensuring they are representative of all natural resource users. It could mean supporting environmental action planning processes or resource sharing strategies. It could be around building capacities for dialogue or supporting women's land tenure, access to credit. For example, in South Sudan, the PBF supported a project that aimed to promote women's economic empowerment and improve their access to natural resources. It provided training and capacity building for women's group on sustainable agricultural practices and promoted their participation in natural resource management committees. But in addition to that, the project also focused on improving women's access to credit and financial services and supporting the establishment of women-led agri-business and enterprises. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see some of the examples that I mentioned of PBF past funded projects that address gender equality and women's empowerment, in case you would like to review them later. But for now, I'd like to spend the last few minutes that I have on reflecting a bit on good practices and lessons learned. So overall, there's definitely been significant progress that has been made in better understanding and addressing both the gender risks and the unique opportunities for inclusion of women in climate security practice, which is growing immensely. And it's now more recognized that integrating such a gender responsive approach is important to achieve sustainable, equitable, and effective peace building outcomes. And we've also seen a lot more recognition for the fact that women and, in fact, other marginalized groups must be included to really ensure that there's a diversity of needs and perspectives and priorities that's being addressed that just leads to more inclusive and effective outcomes, in addition to contributing to our gender equality and women's empowerment goals. So let's look a little bit in detail at a first set of lessons learned, which is really around analysis, partnerships, and capacity strengthening. So focusing on the first, it's obviously very critical to identify how gender intersects with these different vulnerabilities related to climate change, but also the peace and security context. And that is really what sits at the heart of what will inform your design and implementation of the targeted interventions. So this integrated analysis isn't just a gender responsive one. It also really needs to be a conflict sensitive one, right? So the second point around partnerships is a widespread understanding that we now have that it requires engagement with women's groups, local researchers, and local communities to ensure that, of course, our interventions are really grounded in local knowledge and really speak to the lived realities. The capacity strengthening one is something that continues to, of course, come up in terms of how to enhance participation and leadership in these initiatives. But while you will recognize this to be true for our peace building practice in more general, I want to take a look at the second set of lessons learned on the next slide, which is really going into some specific context around careful process design, but also, again, the intersectional analysis, and then something around the sequencing of our projects and M&E. So the first one around process design is really this lesson learned that if we ensure there's enough space for women themselves to guide us on how to address structural and social barriers, that will improve the integration. So in Somalia, for instance, women from diverse backgrounds were given a lot of space to identify priorities and concerns related to environmental degradation and access to natural resources. And the project then designed interventions that address these concerns, such as training women in sustainable agricultural practice, providing support for income generating activities, as well as improving their access to clean water sources. And by involving women directly in the project design, the intervention was much more effective and sustainable. Now, the second around intersectional analysis is that obviously if we look at natural resource use, access, and control, in gender climate security programming, we need to consider intersecting forms of discrimination. So in Ethiopia, a project focused on climate smart agriculture conducted first an intersectional analysis to really understand how not only gender, but also age and socioeconomic status intersects with access to land and other natural resources. And only then the project developed interventions that address these intersecting forms of discrimination and tackled that through providing training and support for women that really was tailored to their specific needs and experience. The point around strategically sequencing is something that comes up quite a lot in the gender, climate, and security debate, and is really believed to help achieve better outcomes. And it basically means that we break down the different components of a project and implement them in a sequence that's just most likely to achieve the outcome that we're aiming for. So in the Philippines, the project team was strategically sequencing the activities to ensure that all community members were better prepared to respond to climate emergencies in a coastal community that was very vulnerable to flooding and other climate hazards. And the project started with providing training on early warning systems and emergency preparedness. Then that was followed by support for community-led disaster risk reduction initiatives, really building on that initial knowledge. And then interventions looked at strengthening livelihoods and improving access to water and sanitation to mitigate some of those risks. And by sequencing the interventions in this way, the project was able to build and increase the resilience in the community in a much more effective way than if they would have done the reversed. So the last one I'll mention is around M&E. So incorporating gender responsive indicators already in the M&E framework obviously helps us to ensure that the project is achieving its intended outcomes. So in South Sudan, a project focused on improving water and sanitation infrastructures really looked at developing strong gender responsive indicators for the M&E framework. And that included measures of women's participation and decision-making in the activities, but also going into detail on the impact of the project on women's access to and control over water resources. So by collecting data on these specific indicators, the project was in a better position to ensure that it was achieving those outcomes and contributing to gender equality and women's empowerment in a way that is more easily to capture than not having a very gender responsive M&E framework. So those were quite a lot of examples. And I think our next slide, as we wrap up this presentation on the substantive elements, is a list of resources that you can refer to for further information on the topics that we've discussed before. I think it might not be visible right now, but we'll make sure to include it as you will find all of the materials on the dedicated website. Now, Ilva, I want to check if Shaza is back online, and then I'd be happy to hand over for the additional information.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kira. I believe that we have Shaza online now. Is that correct? Can you hear us, Shaza?
Yes, I can. Apologies about that.
No, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for all the flexibility. It's much appreciated. So we could hear you introducing yourself, Shaza. So that part is done. So then we can start with the beginning of the webinar. Thank you so much, colleagues. And sorry about
Thank you, everyone, for your flexibility. Again, apologies for the technical glitch. But yes, so and thank you, Kira, and UN Women colleagues for smoothly handing it over, and of course presenting the substantive bits related to the Gender Promotion Initiative for this year. And I won't take long. Basically, I'll just give an overview of the initiative, the eligibility criteria, the themes which you have now been kind of very much presented into. And of course, the themes have now been, so basically we flipped. Kira thankfully gave of that overview. As many of you know, in 2011, the Peace Building Fund launched the Gender Promotion Initiative, and the aim was to allocate specific peace building projects that promote gender equality and women's empowerment as a principal objective. This is, of course, meant to be a form of implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325, in addition to other resolutions and commitments related to women, peace, and security, including the 7-point action plan on gender responsive peace building. Now, GPI has invested $137 million in 109 projects across over 30 countries that were all PBF eligible. And last year in 2022, we invested $23 million. And as I mentioned, the 7-point action plan, there is that commitment that the UN is to meet a 15% target for peace building allocations that are focused to and contribute to and drive gender equality and women's empowerment. And the PBF has exceeded in the past 7 years its own internal commitment of 30%, and we've been reaching 47% across all our investment portfolio on an annual basis, including last year in 2022. Next slide, please. In terms of the eligibility criteria, we have the details of the review criteria and the timeline available, along with all the guideline and resources in our website. In terms of the types of the proposals we expect joint UN proposals, joint UN CSO proposals, in addition to CSO proposals, whereby the applicant is only one CSO. All these proposals are required to be both gender and age sensitive. So these considerations, regardless of the type of proposal or the theme, are of course need to be addressed. GPI proposals are required to be a gender marker 3 project. You can please refer to our gender marker guidelines that will explain the details of and the requirements of a gender marker 3. And that basically means that gender equality and women's empowerment needs to be a principal objective of the proposal. In addition, 40% of the requested budget needs to be allocated to national or local CSOs as implementing partners, and in particular, women-led peacebuilding and women-led organizations. The deadline for this year is Friday, June 9th. Through our website, so we really hope that you'll make sure to apply by that deadline. In terms of the eligible countries, we have the list of projects. The list of countries that are eligible for this year. You could see it in the presentation, except for the ones that say only YPI, which are Central African Republic, Liberia, South Sudan, the Gambia, Colombia, Guatemala, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. These are only open to YPI for this year, and the reason being that they are applicants to the GPI 2.0 initiative. So otherwise, everyone is eligible for the YPI, and except for the countries mentioned, the GPI for 2023. The next slide, please. Now, in terms of who can apply, of course, UN agencies, funds, and programs, in addition to civil society organizations. And when we say civil society organizations, we do refer and mean international and national ones. For UN submissions, we expect a maximum of 2 proposals per initiative, per UNCT, or per country, meaning 4 proposals, 2 that are YPI and 2 GPI as a maximum. In addition, all UNCT and joint UNCSO submissions must be endorsed by the resident coordinator, and the endorsement is in the form of a submission of a signed cover letter. For joint UN proposals, the grants are between $800,000 to $2 million per project. And we expect to see 2 to 3 UN partners as direct fund recipients per project. For joint UN CSO proposals, the grants are also between $800,000 to $2 million per project. And there we will see a maximum of 2 UN partners and 1 CSO partner as direct fund recipients per project. Therefore, either 1 UN and 1 CSO or 2 UN partners and 1 CSO as direct fund recipients. And the CSO partners in these joint proposals need to meet the eligibility criteria for CSOs. In addition to that, for CSO submissions, there needs to be, if we are talking at a global level, and I think this is more relevant for international CSOs, we would accept up to 4 proposals per organization. A maximum of 2 proposals per initiative per organization globally. So globally, that is a total of 4 proposals, 2 YPI proposals and 2 GPI proposals. The grants are between $300,000 and $2 million per project. A maximum of 1 CSO as a direct fund recipient per project. And as mentioned before, it needs to meet the CSO eligibility criteria. And the concept notes can be submitted by the CSO independently. However, in the final approval stage of the full project proposals, they do need to be approved by the RC or DSRSG, depending on the context, and the government of that country. We need to see the approval of that at the last stage, which is the proposal stage. Excuse me. All CSO applicants are also recommended, we really highly recommend that they reach out to PBF secretariats and focal points in the project country. And if you do have any problem reaching out or connecting, please let us know and we can definitely put you in touch. Next slide, please. For the CSO eligibility criteria, of course, the CSO needs to be formally registered as a nonprofit for the duration of the proposed project. And the registration needs to be both at the country where the headquarters of the CSO, in the case it's an international one, in addition to the project country where the project will be implemented. They are required to receive a low risk score in a hacked micro assessment in the project country. The questionnaire for such an assessment can be found in a link we provide in the presentation for their reference. If they're already assessed, all low risk scores from January 22 onwards will be accepted. If not assessed yet, the organizations are for organizations that are invited to the second stage, the PBF will commission a micro assessment for them so that it is completed by the time the process is done. The CSO would also need a UN reference or a donor reference from the project country that attests to satisfactory completion and financial and programmatic completion and management of a grant in the last 3 years. For the second stage, CSOs will also be reviewed regarding prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. For gender marker 3, the principal purpose of the project, as I said, there are the detailed requirements in our gender marker guidance that has more information, and it is available in our website. The principal purpose of a gender marker 3 project is to advance gender equality and women's empowerment in the context of peace building. And one way we like to explain it is without a gender equality and women's empowerment component, the project couldn't exist. So gender equality is fundamental to the project design and the expected results. And we expect a budget of 80 to 100% of the total budget is allocated to gender equality and women's empowerment. And to be honest, in these cases, we don't see any reason why it shouldn't be less than 100%. Next slide. In terms of the lessons learned in terms of from previous applications. Now, the main things we really look for are the link to peace building, and I don't think we can highlight that enough. There needs to be a clear and articulate link between the proposed interventions and the peace building outcome. And this is something that all successful proposals have demonstrated. And I think this is something that, if it's the peace building fund, and therefore when there is no clear peace building outcome, that greatly weakens the chances of a proposal making it and being accepted. For the in terms of the gender and youth responsiveness, also successful concept notes placed both these aspects at the center of the proposal. So even if it is a gender promotion initiative, we expect to see a good youth sensitivity or responsiveness in the proposal, and vice versa. In terms of innovation, I know we've had partners who've kind of maybe struggled a bit with it. So successful concept notes articulate how and why a proposal was innovative. And again, with innovation, I think it's something that is very context specific and intervention specific. And I think it's only the applicants who can explain why a certain approach in that specific place and time is considered innovative. And again, all the details, all the review criteria, whether about the gender marker or the concept notes, are all available in the call for proposal. Next.
Yes, and thank you. I think that concludes it.
Yeah,
right?
Thank you. So yeah, we flipped it, but I think we covered it all now.
I think so. I will stop presenting now so we can all see each other, and then we're ready to answer questions. One moment. Great. So great, thank you so much. Okay, so colleagues here are ready to answer questions. Let's see if there are any questions in the chat or in the Q&A.
Hilf, I think we might have a question from one of the attendees who raised their hands. Are we able to activate the mic?
I'm trying. Let's see. Now it should work. Jörg, please go ahead.
Hi, I hope you can copy me well.
Yes.
Can you hear me okay? Perfect. No, thanks for this very comprehensive presentation. Very interesting, specifically for Somalia. I'm working there as a PBF coordinator. Actually, more two suggestions I would like to bring up, and probably you have heard about those previously. The first one relates to many agencies who in previous years have mentioned that the time between the actual call being announced and the concept notes to be submitted is extremely tight. Of course, interagency kind of joint proposals need time, consultations with counterparts, with communities. All this requires time. We understand there's time also between the concept note and the full proposal, but generally we feel the tight timelines kind of reduce the chances of having quality and consultative projects. So I know that I was told before that it's really difficult to do this differently, but yeah, wanting to bring that up again. The second suggestion is if there's any way of involving the UN system, the resident coordinator's office in some way or the other, not on the selection of the actual proposals that will be selected, because it is and it should be a very New York driven process. But I was just wondering in terms of facts, when feedback is given, that there's a chance contextually to clarify from the side of the UN system in a specific country. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Jörg. I'm happy to start, and then Shasa, please fill in if there's anything I missed. So indeed, for the GPI, the timeline is quite strict, but I would like to remind everyone that what we're requesting at the first stage is indeed concept notes. So it's not full proposal, so it's concept notes. But that said, of course, the timeline is quite limited. I think at this point, there's nothing we can do about that. However, I want to flag also that, as you may know, PBF is starting to pilot what we call GPI 2.0 in some contexts as well. And in those cases, there's more flexibility. But in terms of the GPI, the regular GPI, I'm sorry that there's no more flexibility right now. So just to clarify that right now, that's the timeline that it is for all GPI. And Shasa, anything to add on that?
No, I think you covered it all.
Okay, great. And maybe also to add, in terms of collaborating with UN country teams and so on, that's of course, encouraged, but that would be coordinated on the country level, so not from our side per se, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's not what I meant. I think what I was referring to is that when the proposals are reviewed, and I've seen that the feedback is often on the spot and we can understand it, but I think sometimes the final judgment, if you want to call it, or the final review result sometimes is based on assumptions that we don't necessarily share here. So to kind of make sure that there's some kind of level of clarification on some facts or contextual details, it would be good to involve the country level RC offices, PBF secretariats, and so on, to make sure that you have the full information in New York to make a good and informed decision. Over.
Thank you so much. Yes, very much agreed. Indeed, like those, all the colleagues that you're mentioning do collaborate in the second part, so more on the proposal development stage. But indeed, on the concept note stage, the decision is made from PBF, if that helps to clarify. But yes, indeed, and we agree. Okay. Shasa, over to you.
Okay, I think I'm now seeing the questions. I think for the themes, yes, there are two themes, and I think we do realize that they are interconnected in ways and probably overlap, but for the purpose of the proposal, I think we'll leave it to you to decide which one of the themes they fit into more likely. So yeah, we would want you to select one of the themes, but also with the understanding that yes, there are probably elements of both overlapping. And desired number of concept notes, I'm not sure, Lieva, how many pages it is.
So it's not pages, but indeed there are limits of how many like words that are required for the concept note stage. So please, it's also already attached in the call for proposal. So please have a close look there. That's also how the portal will be looking like later. There's also a question regarding if one proposal can address two themes.
Yes,
Shasa, would you like to expand on that?
Yes, that's what I meant in terms of two themes. We realize that with the climate adaptation and the natural resource management are overlapping probably when it comes to project designs in the country. But we would like you to choose one of the themes, and we leave it to you to decide which one or which aspects are dominant in the proposal and therefore align with one of the themes. Again, understanding that a project proposal will probably combine two elements practically. There is a question on partnership with women-led DPOs who are disabled be welcomed? Yes, absolutely. That will be absolutely no question about that. We welcome those proposals.
Great, thank you. There's also a question regarding if the contacts for PBF secretariats and focal points will be shared. Indeed, it will be shared together when we share the slides after this presentation.
In terms of find out whether local organizations can design project proposals, not necessarily. Yes, it doesn't have to cover or be national. It can cover a specific sub-region within a country, again, with the explanation also in terms of the targeting, why that region, etc. So yeah, it doesn't have to be a whole national project.
Great.
Glory, the question is, with women's empowerment as per gender equality in Cameroon, maybe you'd like to elaborate on that question, please?
I'm trying to allow the microphone. Here we go, I think. Can you hear us? I'm afraid we're not able to hear you.
There's a question on a joint proposal UN-CSO. Is it mandatory that CSO had a grant in the past with the UN country agency for HACT assessment purposes or co-implementer of a joint project? Correct me if I'm wrong, Yilva, there needs to be a referral. That's what I think we just mentioned, that there needs to be, maybe not necessarily from that specific UN agency you are about to partner with, but a donor referral or a UN agency, any UN agency referral is part of the eligibility requirement.
Indeed, correct. So some kind of reference, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a grant per se. And there's more information also in the call for proposal, hoping that this helps to clarify. Okay.
Glory, I think if the question is maybe answered by some of the issues our UN women colleagues raised in terms of partnering with women-led or women groups and CSOs and activists in terms of looking at analysis and integrated analysis to identify the issues and the variables surrounding gender equality and women's empowerment to be addressed. So yeah, if you go back to the presentation, I think these elements that were shared by our UN women colleagues are a good way to start looking at what would make sense in that specific context in Cameroon in terms of addressing gender equality.
Indeed, correct. And I see a question also regarding UN agencies and a partner, if it's possible to partner also with host government line ministries and so on. And indeed, that's possible. However, that would be together with implementing partners. So it's not as direct recipients, but indeed, we recommend collaboration, of course, with the governmental colleagues as well.
So Yasmin asked a question about women-led organizations. Yes, there's a preference, there's an encouragement, but it's not an eligibility criteria. So if you are working and partnering with a local or a CSO that's not necessarily women-led, with kind of having good plans and interventions and a process that also included consulting with women groups, that is not that does not bar or does not kind of affect eligibility. It's just something that we've been trying to encourage more.
Thank you so much. And I see also a question in the Q&A section. Kira, maybe you would be able to help us clarify that one. So this one is on the thematic focus on number 2. You mentioned of sustainability agriculture. Could climate resilient agriculture be appropriate as well?
Right. Thank you, Yilva. Yeah, I think that's a great example, and definitely that's something that that they would be looking at and looking for. The PBF thematic review on climate security and environmental peace building was already brought up a couple of times. I would highly recommend to take a look at that because it includes some very good examples of past programming. And I also remember there are quite some examples of innovative or smart agriculture mentioned throughout the review. So it could be anything related to climate smart agriculture practices, such as conservation or intercropping, agroforestry, to increase resilience to climate change, and how that again relates to positively impacting the peace and security dynamics. It could also be around like very precision agriculture technologies, such as certain sensors or GPS that can optimize the use of resources so that can improve crop yields, reduce environmental impacts, and then again, of course, linking it back to socioeconomic stability and the peace building potential of using that. There are different examples. Like I remember reading something around vertical farming as well, right? So that's like using stack layers of crops to increase yields and reduce land use. So I would definitely recommend taking a look at that document for more examples. And then Yilva, if you'll allow me, because we're not entirely sure what the question is from our colleague in the context of Cameroon. But just to say that we did have in the past GPI, sorry, not a GPI, but a regular PBF project on Cameroon, which was going into the local governance for effective conflict prevention in some parts of Cameroon. It was a UN Women and UN Habitat project that is just been implemented. So it focuses a lot on land issues. So there's definitely a strong gender focus as well, despite it not being a GPI project. So in case our colleagues is looking for an example from their country context, I will drop that in the chat shortly.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. And I also dropped the... Oh,
sorry.
I also dropped the link to the thematic review that's also listed in the call for proposal. But just to share the link here as well. Shazia, please go ahead.
No, sorry, it was just a question that I think I answered, and I just wanted to stress again about the working with disabled and focusing women who are disabled. And I think whether disabled women or any other group, I think it's something that we do encourage very much. It's just as long as it is in line with the theme and has a strong peace building link. And we actually encourage if there are any specific groups or subgroups in the communities that you work with that you think need to be highlighted in your projects, please do so. Again, as long as it's in line with the theme and has a strong peace building outcome or link.
Fantastic. I can't see any more questions at this point, unless I'm mistaken. Colleagues from UN Women, anything else to add from your side?
I think we covered the substantive question, and most was obviously around the criteria, but we remain available for any questions. And thank you so much for inviting us here today. And it's really exciting to see this year's GPI call evolve.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining and for helping us. Let's see if there are any other questions before we end. I see there's one question from colleagues saying that in some countries it's not possible to receive government approval beforehand. Indeed, that's in some contexts it's of course difficult to receive government approval. We, as PBF, we do require some kind of government approval for the projects. But if there are specific questions regarding that, feel free to reach out to the website or the email, and then of course also to the PBF secretariats or focal points. Hoping that helps to clarify a bit. Okay, I don't see any more questions coming in. Shasa, any last words from you?
No. Thank you very much. And again, sorry for the technical glitches, but thank you very much for your patience, for your flexibility, and we really look forward to seeing your ideas and proposals and concept notes. And as Ylva said, please feel free to reach out with any questions or clarifications, in addition to referring to all the material that was made available, whether the ones on our website or the ones made available by UN Women colleagues.
Indeed. Thank you so much and good luck.
Thank you so much, colleague. Best of luck, everyone.